Yes. Hi, Rebecca.
Hey, everybody's showing up.
See ya.
How long did that?
Yeah, trading calls about 3 times a day.
Hi, Ian. How are you?
How's it going, Dad?
Didn't be bad for you.
Good. Good to see you.
It has been. As long as it's can't really account for
Moving in and out of there.
Oh, that's fine.
buy out by a week. If it exists.
Yeah, did I?
Rick,
Cause I need something else to do.
That's the reality that I. When I got. Phoenix is just
I
like.
just don't have enough going on. I just could use a few more things on my plate.
How are your commissioners doing?
Good, yeah,
They're enjoying the job?
yeah, 2 of them got reelected, so we have Donald and Melody were reelected, or no, Tony and Melody were reelected. Donald's in his last term.
Okay,
So we got some kind of senior folks around now, going on 5-7 years each.
like the good old days with Mary Ann and.
Yeah, right.
Right. Maybe
Yeah.
they'll die before they.
Since,
And so we'll make.
since people are probably gonna continue to drift in and
You may need one. It's-
join online, let's make the jump here.
Oh, my living.
Oh, yeah, of our watershed, that one.
We can see
I think
exactly.
you brought me one of those too.
So these are the 2 walls of the tent. You don't,
Are the,
check this, what you do? You got an entire lecture. I use just these 2 walls when I do the kids' half-hour presentation at the River Festival. I
yeah,
just tell them about, here's where the water goes from, here's the different basins. And here we are at the Northwest Colorado, and here's our rivers, and it's just a lecture all by itself. And that's why grabs people. By it. Exactly, people see that and they just go, what is that? That's so interesting.
yeah. I like how it's bigger for bigger rivers.
We tried to do that on this map, but you did it.
Okay, fellas, I think we're gonna.
I think that turned out great.
Gonna
Are you
let out the
gonna
question.
kick us in line here?
Sorry,
Are you gonna get us all in line?
yes, well, that's probably not gonna happen in my lifetime.
Okay,
Right, sir.
All right, so thanks for being here. I admit that I've been less than organized here for a while, but we do have an interesting topic, a couple of topics for today. And so I think it makes sense to dig into those and I think I'm anxious to hear your thoughts on a couple things. So go ahead and advance that. What we're gonna, our agenda is pretty typical. So we're gonna let Rebecca go ahead and give us a basin hydrology update. And then we're gonna talk a little bit about the Colorado River, a very interesting piece that appeared on National Public Radio in reference to a paper that was published by some friends of ours. And then we're just gonna revisit Commissioner Mitchell's 8 negotiating priorities in contrast to sort of what that essential pillars piece was, so we can kind of think about and compare and discuss the differences. And I think you'll find that to be interesting and possibly frustrating. Okay, so with that, Rebecca, do you wanna
Yeah, I'm just gonna go
take
ahead.
the con here and we'll start? We're not anticipating Amy Ostite being with us. She'll be here for a few minutes this evening for the Commissioner's Corner, but she's not gonna participate, I don't think, today in the Big River.
Rebecca, were you gonna share?
Yeah.
Okay, I will stop. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah. You wanna do that, or do you wanna do it at the round table level?
No, I should do something here. We'll take one.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, well. I think we all know that we're looking at kind of a little bit of a dismal runoff season compared to what we were hoping for. Figure out where my. Coming up, there we go, all right. You know, when I gave the update back in January, we were below average, we were, sorry, March was the last time I gave the update, we were below average, but you can see, if you go up on May 1st and look at that black line. Is this year, we were kind of right in that green spot, we were looking at average and we were hoping for a good spring snow. That did not happen, we peaked kind of at the, average peak. But then had a really, really dry April in the Yampa White Little Snake, and that is across kind of the whole Colorado watershed, not just within our subbasin. Pretty drastically dry April, not a lot of precipitation, so that black line just really plummets. Along with the fact that we had some warm temps at some periods, not always, but had pretty good melt. So we're kind of in that yellow range now, we're dropped off faster than normal, and this is the Colorado River Basin Forecast Center does some forecast updates every year at different periods, and this is a screenshot from their presentation where they're looking at kind of the difference between April 1st forecast and the May 1st forecast, and sorry, this is the forecast, this is SWE conditions, so it's a snow water equivalent. And you can kind of just see from the snapshot of the map, if you're looking at Colorado, which is all the way over on the far right section. This is kind of the whole upper Colorado River. But you can see that there's just a lot of red and pink and orange, and that's below average. In the Yampa White, the SWE from April 1st to May 1st went from about average to down to 76% of average, so we dropped about 26% of average. So sitting below average, this is the forecast, and it's a little bit hard to see because there's a lot of different points where they measure this or where they forecast this. But this is essentially the water supply forecast for a bunch of different points along the Yampa and the White River, as well as the Little Snake. And the key takeaway here is that everything is below average. We're looking for forecasted water supply. The forecasted water supply is looking the best in some of on the Elk River, for example, sitting at 81% of average, and the Yampa River at Steamboat Springs is 82% average. But that water supply forecast for some other areas like the Little Snake River near Dixon is at about 58%, so pretty low. White River near Meeker, 72%. So definitely looking at a lower water supply than normal.
I like that though, that we haven't looked at this forecast screen before, have we, Rebecca?
No, I think throughout the year, kind of the relevant slides change a little bit, because obviously in November, they don't really have forecast material. But this is, I think this is kind of that time period in March, it's still all a big guess of what the forecast is. They make some predictions, but May is kind of that time where we're like, we know. And so this is when all the forecasts are really coming out. So yeah, I think these are really interesting, and if anyone's interested in like, where do I find all this information, I'm happy to walk you through it. I usually have to reteach myself every time because it's a little bit tricky, so I'm happy to help anyone walk through it if they're interested. And And then switching a little bit to a larger scale, if we're looking at Lake Powell, this has also had a pretty significant shift. This one's actually interesting because, their forecast for the inflow dropped about 20% from
Oh.
April to May. So they went from, I forget what it was, I forget the number it dropped from, but now their inflow is projected for if we're just looking for the, April to July inflow, that inflow projected is 3.5 million acre feet.
And what's the total delivery for the water year?
The whole water year is something like 6.
And that's through July is through the prediction.
I think the 6 is the water year, so that's through the end of,
October.
yeah, October, around there.
Well, from October till April
Yeah.
or May,
No, the water year is like October to the end of September.
right? And so this year, they're looking at the inflow at Powell being what by July?
So if we're just looking at the inflow,
Yeah.
that highlighted portion up here in the yellow, that's the
Oh.
inflow just for the runoff period from April to July. And that
Half,
was
almost half.
3.5 million acre feet, which is 55% of average, which is one of the lowest runoff projections in the past.
Yeah, in less than a year.
It's a low runoff or low inflow. And that's really just due to, as I said, low precipitation in the upper basin in this past month. That was, 60% of average. So, and you can see on this is their forecast plot that they use. This pink is kind of the band of where it could be, with that highest pink box being like the, an unlikely high scenario. And the bottom pink box being an unlikely low scenario, so kind of that middle range is what they most expect, and that's where that blue line is. And you can see that from April to May, that pink band just dropped quite a bit. So definitely quite a big drop from last month's forecast.
So one thing that's kind of interesting, Rebecca, is people like me. When we get to around the April timeframe and we go, well, we've got about average snowpack. We feel pretty good about our year because we say, you know what? The snow is there, the average snow is there, so it's gonna be available to us. But what this says is, that's not really true. That if it doesn't snow in April, we're in deep doo-doo.
Yeah, I mean, April's really a make or break month for snow.
It really is, that's what this thing says.
Yeah.
Because in May, we're all sitting, first of April, we're going, hey, average snow, we'll be okay, man, it'll be a great year, but we'll be okay. But if you don't get that April snow.
Yeah, and there's a lot of other factors that we just don't know about either, like how much soil moisture plays into it, or sublimation, which is when snow just, evaporates or is wind blown off of mountains. So those are factors that science is doing a lot of studies to find out how much leaves from that, but we don't know. There's a lot of variables, so it's difficult to forecast. Yeah, so that's just highlighting that drop. And then I did not update this teacup slide because there really wasn't a whole lot of change. Basically, the upper reservoirs increased a percent, or Flaming Gorge increased a few percentage points, but not a whole lot of percentage points there. And Lake Mead dropped 3%. So not a whole lot of change on this scale. I did notice, and I didn't include the image, but did notice that the lines for Lake Powell inflow and outflow pretty much stay the same year to year, or at least they have in my previous presentation, but that line for the inflow is starting to deviate from last year's line. It's going a little lower than last year's inflow, so unlikely to see as much inflow as last year. That is the end of that, but happy if anyone has questions or comments.
No, that was very helpful. And it's, Tim, did you have a question?
I had just a comment that I think it's good to keep in mind. And I went back and looked at the most recent report or projections longer term from the Colorado Climate Center. And unfortunately, what we're seeing this winter, spring so far is very much in line with their projections for what our futures are going to look like, which is average snow, but then drier springs and then hotter summers, which I think we've all been so trained to be focused so much on the SWE, as you said, Jeff, on April 1, that, this isn't an abnormal year. This is what we need to be planning for going forward. And it does create enormous challenges because how do you do the forecasting, and you can't just count on those snowpack information as well as you need anymore. You need to know more about soil moisture. You need to know more about spring precipitation and summer temperatures. So that's not a rosy picture, but it is in line with what the Climate Center has been projecting for a little bit for the Western Mountains.
You got it. Anything more you want to cheer us up with?
No, it's raining now though. How's that? That's good.
Doug, go ahead. Doug Munger, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't hear you, Jeff. So anyhow, I found it revealing about 4 years ago, and Rebecca, you could help me here and film. But the averages got adjusted down by like 10 or 12% like 4 or 5 years ago. So when we're talking about 55% of average, we're talking about 55% of the average of now, not of what historical is. And so I just wanted to, and that was, I thought when average, so it was 100-year average, or whether it's 30-year average or 20-year average. So that's all relevant. So when we're talking about averages, and when Rebecca's talking about those averages, those are averages on reduced numbers from this later time frame and where we're at here. So that was revealed, and it was eye-opening to me. Anyhow, thank you.
So you didn't think Tim had discouraged us enough, so you thought you'd kind of pile on there. That was your point there, Doug. Yeah, thanks. Will, what the heck? You got anything more you want to throw in on that, or?
Yeah, I was actually kind of curious. I don't know if you can hear me, but from Rebecca's slide, it looked like she had Powell going from 32% to 33%.
Yeah, well, so that's just, that slide's just like an update of what is the current elevation and percent full of Lake Powell. And in March, when I gave those slides, it was at 32, or I forget the lower number. Since then, because of runoff, it's gone up a percentage.
A percent, but that's not that great either, Will, because this is the time of year when that thing should go up 3 or 4% in a month, not a percentage point, right? This is big inflow time, and so it's good that Powell didn't drop like Meade did, but it's not a 1% increase is not a great upload.
And Ken, I wanted to, real quick, I was looking at my notes, you mentioned the water year forecasted inflow. That hasn't been updated yet. They haven't done the May numbers, so it's right now projected at 6.8 million acre feet, which is about 71% of average. But when the May 24-month study comes out, that's gonna drop based on this recent forecast. Yeah.
So just to remind us, because I always forget, so it's 1st of October to 31st to 30th of September, or is it
Yep.
yes 1st of November to 31st of October?
It's October
October
1st, which is
1st,
confusing because then
okay,
the irrigation year is,
Yeah,
irrigation water year is different.
I'm not sure why I can't ever remember that. Okay, all right, any more questions on the hydrology? Chuck, go ahead.
On the soil moisture, I didn't quite understand, is that something that should be calculated in, or is it in the projected?
You know, Sally may know some too, they, right now, the Colorado River Basin Forecast Center, I think they do modeled soil moisture, but they're,
It's actually not, yeah, it's modeled soil moisture, but not the actual soil moisture, readings that we're getting now. We're taking from our stations.
So Sally and Tim, you guys are both working on installing real active soil moisture measuring locations throughout the basin. Have you been able to extrapolate any actual data versus what was done through?
Not quite yet, just because
Okay.
our stations are fairly new, and so
Right.
we only have a couple years of data, so we'd like to have 5 years of data minimum under our belt before we can really start making some comparisons.
So that model though, Sally, does. It
It uses soil
it's
moisture.
used to account for some changes in runoff or no? I mean, how does it affect the forecast per se?
You know that, I'm not sure of the details, but I do know that, we're looking to get soil moisture integrated into models more, but there is an aspect of soil moisture in the modeling as it is in the forecast.
yeah, it's not actual measurements, they're just kind of using a computer to guess. It could be a tool they use in the future along with the ASO flight
Yeah.
and some of those additional
That's
tools
the goal.
per Tim's, kind of point that you just looking at SWE isn't really enough.
Yeah, and we've really had that experience. In those extended drought years, the second year of a consecutive dry year, we know. That soil moisture has a huge impact on. And in this year, it's not even really the second year, but just speaking anecdotally as one irrigator. So it's pretty dry right now. In our neck of the woods, it's pretty dry.
Now, the IBCC talks a lot about this data collection, and it was the theme of our meeting last June in Durango. And was the consensus of the group to prioritize, what is our one action item that we can agree on that really will help us deal with this type of hydrology? And it was to ask DNR to continue to lobby our legislature and any other sources of funding they can identify to gather more data, because we know that we're not studying a 30 or 50-year period that's just a monologue. This is gonna be, it's changing, and so our models are changing, and they're changing faster than just a standard deviation, so we're, the next generation will thank us for all this data, but we're not gonna have a whole lot to show people immediately.
I would be happy if I thought they were gonna thank us for one darn thing. Okay,
Yes.
so let's take the jump onto the Colorado River. My discussions with Amy, my monthly meeting with her was a pretty short one. What she told me was that they are at a critical point in their negotiations in the informal meetings that they're having a series of to try to find some common ground. And as a result of that, they're very, very reluctant to make any public statements whatsoever about how that's going or, so we're not gonna hear too much tonight at the roundtable. Didn't really think she had a lot to contribute in terms of the negotiation today, but we did spend a fair bit of time talking about this NPR piece, so go ahead, Sal, one more slide.
There we go.
Oh, two more. So, I just wanna say that. And I don't like to be critical, I know that they've had their hands full, especially my friend Amy, they've worked and worked. I think. Recent press. Continues not to be on our side, continue the flow of information in general, with maybe one exception, has really not been in our favor. And this next article that actually Tim forwarded to me about the same time I discovered it. And it's, in my opinion, it's very unhelpful. So let's take a look at that next. I don't know if any of you heard this piece or had a chance to, maybe you heard it on the radio initially as they interviewed people talking about the paper itself. But the paper itself is called 7 Essential Pillars for the post-2026 Operating Guidelines. And here's a little summary right out of their paper. And I am paraphrasing at one level, but I'm only using words exactly the way they describe them from their paper. And we'll, by the way, we'll go ahead and put this into on the right workspace on on the website. So the first thing they start right out. Hi, Steve. So I probably should have said before, I have a slide in here that's hidden, that's missing. So this thing was written by 7 people. And among the 7 people were our friends Eric Kuhn and John Fleck. You remember Dr. Fleck, he's the Utah guy. And of course, Eric is the former Colorado River water manager and was on the 2007 operating guidelines. This is the same, yeah, this is the same guy who
Sorry.
that we had controversy from the last time. Another person that is a very unhelpful, Ann Castle. She was in the Upper Colorado River Commission. For crying out loud. And so of the 7 people here, 3 of them at least should be people who we would like to think would be sensitive to not providing information that could be weaponized by our adversaries. But apparently that wasn't the case. So I want to say that there are some very good ideas in these 7 points, but they start right out with the one thing that of course is guaranteed to provoke us. And that is that very first thing, enforceable reductions in both basins are necessary. That's their first thing. Now, we're gonna talk about a few of these in more detail, so I'm gonna keep going here. They go on to say reductions can't be predicated on federal compensation. That makes sense to us. That's positive. They say conservation pools in Mead and Powell are essential. And the way they talk about those things and express them is really well done. It's very worth paying attention to. They agree with us in our position that management opportunities, water management opportunities have to be available to the tribes. They've never really had the value of their water rights recognized. That has to stop. They make a really good point that storage recovery in both Mead and Powell have to be built into mandatory reductions. It's not enough to reduce usage based on inflow. But usage also has to help us rebuild those reservoirs, right? And that's very well expressed in this paper and very well written. They talk about flexibility that's required for environmental objectives. And then they say something that I'm not exactly sure what it means, and I've read it several times. But they go on, their final sort of principle is that whatever else happens, they absolutely must protect domestic water for public health and safety. And what I think they mean is that every other water usage, industrial, and agricultural has to be secondary when we reach the point where public health and safety is threatened. That's, I think, what they need. They don't come right out and say, you ag guys probably ought to watch your back. But I think that's what they mean. And, you know, maybe that's fair enough. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about this and I want to hear your view, but Sal, can you go one more slide? So the first thing about this very first thing, enforceable reductions in both basins are necessary. I'm gonna be myself here, which is always iffy. When I was an undergrad at Mines, there weren't that many girls at our school. And there was this one attractive girl in one of my classes, I can't think now, maybe calculus. And so ultimately, I finally worked up a little bit of nerve and I said, do you think you could ever see yourself going out with somebody like me? She said, I suppose I could if he wasn't too much like you. So being too much like me has its downside, but I'm gonna be myself right here. This principle and the way they articulate it in their paper is based on false premises. It's misleadingly stated. And it's just plain wrong. So you're welcome to read it, but one of the statements in here, this is right out of their paper. It says that average use, while not exceeding the legal allocation, greatly surpasses supply. Now, what does that sound like? It sounds like both basins aren't really exceeding their legal allocation. But the truth is that on average, we're not exceeding the legal allocation because we are way under and they are way over. So on average, it's true that we're not exceeding the legal allocation. But one of us is, right? And the second thing they say that I think is just absolutely false, it's widely acknowledged that every state and every sector must contribute to the solution. That's not widely acknowledged. It's widely acknowledged in Arizona, California, and Nevada. It's not acknowledged in Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming. I mean, this is one of those debating logical fallacies where the person says, I think we can all agree that, and then they say something that we don't all agree on, right? These two things are not true. So that's Jeff's somewhat heated opinion.
Yeah, where are we at with bringing that up and counting those 7 pillars? Is there a potential to do that, or is it a, go ahead, I see you wanted to say something.
No, I meant to read to you. And again, you know, it's easy for me, who, you know, irrigates and pays attention to this 3 hours a month compared to Becky and Amy, and they're living it every day, so I respect what they're trying to do, and I really have great affection for both of them, but this is Becky's response. I'll read it to you. I appreciate the interest and commitment of stakeholders to help the 7 basin states find a sustainable solution, said Colorado's commissioners of the UTRC, Becky Mitchell. We can and must live within the means of the river throughout the basin. So as always, Jeff, something like this gets out there. It's an NPR, for crying out loud. Then we respond. And no one even knows or cares or listens. So I think
How long have the 7 pillars been worded that way? When did that come out?
when did that come out? Tim, do you remember the date of the article?
I have the paper open, the actual papers, April 25th, so it's not that long
Yeah.
ago.
No, that was only a couple weeks ago.
It's been out a couple of weeks, yeah,
So,
This is from NPR.
yeah,
but the story you're talking about is from NPR, right?
right.
The
right.
7 pillars were established by the negotiating committee.
But no, these
No, no.
pillars were established by those 7 people, 3 of whom were Eric Kuhn, John Fleck, and Ann Castle. Then there's 4 others. From
It's Jack
environmental
Jack
groups,
Schmidt.
and one is a Nevada attorney and one is an Arizona one. It's a
Yeah.
group of 7 people who wrote the paper.
So there's.
It's actually 6. The other 3 are Jack Schmidt.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tim.
The other 3 are Jack Schmidt. There's only 6 from Utah. And then Catherine Sorensen, who was with Phoenix Water, and then another New Mexican, Catherine Tara, who I don't know.
Kyle Center, that's
It's
Catherine
Arizona.
Sorensen.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, there's only 6 people. I'm sorry, I said there were 7. There's only 6 people. One is a New Mexican, yeah, one's a former director of Phoenix Water. So that's who these 7 people are. And the paper's dated the 25th of April, as Tim said. So I think you're touching on the conclusion before we've even gotten there, Jeff, and that is that once again, and we've had a little bit of this conversation before, it's frustrating. We need NPR to have a 6-minute segment where they interview Steve Hinkelmeyer and Chuck Whiteman, who say, look, for 100 years, one basin has overused and one basin has underused. So when you say everyone should share the pain, and we disagree, the context for that disagreement is we have underused and they have overused. That's never presented clearly in a public enough way to build any kind of public support or public opinion for that trouble. You know, what is it that prevents the upper basin from being good at telling that story? Yeah, I don't know. Does anyone have an opinion about that? We just, we're,
Well, you know, you can say that we have been sharing the pain. Because when they only run out of water when they can't get water released out of Mead. We run out of water when it doesn't snow. We're gonna face the shortage again this year.
there's no 2 ways about it.
So I would argue that, yeah, we are sharing the pain. We are definitely fully engaged in the shortage.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe
that's
that's what
just
they meant.
another repeat of, remember the article that we published, which we refer to that as natural curtailment. And we talk about even in that drought year, when they used 10 million acre feet, our usage fell from 4.6 million acre feet to 3.5 million acre feet. It's true that we are curtailed. The problem, Ken, is not that. The problem is that we just can't seem to get that story out there. Where, you know, I mean. Eric Kuhn knows that.
I would think,
John Fleck knows that. But
and Castle certainly knows that.
she certainly knows that. Tim, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm anxious to hear you go and sort of do the comparison with the current Colorado principles, because I actually, you know, there's one thing about how we're treated in the press. The real matter is what is going to happen in the negotiations. And I don't know to what extent that's going to be framed by the public perception as much as good negotiators from the states. And, you know, the other thing I'll say, which it
Very,
will be
very good
controversial,
point.
but there's part of me that definitely says, they're putting aside how they said it. They're probably right about point number one. And that you're not going to get an agreement between the states without there being some enforceable reductions on both upper and lower basin. And they did say in the paper, doesn't mean equal reductions. It just means some, and that is where the negotiation stands. So, I sometimes get worried if we're like, we can't give up any more water because we're naturally curtailed. That's not a very good negotiating position for the upper basin because they're not giving. So the question is, how does this translate into the way Becky Mitchell and the state are approaching the negotiations now? Where are those points? And where do we as a basin need to begin to be thinking about how we might be able to, I mean, it's too early, but to respond to whatever does come out of the negotiations, if indeed this point number one, no matter how they say it, is actually a fact, that there's not going to be agreement that doesn't have some level of reductions in both basins.
So Tim is making their point, but you're not reading the entire paragraph here, obviously.
No.
And they do say that politically, it's probably not feasible, or the idea of an enforceable mandatory reduction on the part of the upper basin will be politically necessary in order to
Yes.
reach an agreement. And that's what Tim just said.
Yes.
So let's talk about Commissioner Mitchell, but just real quickly, in the interest of fairness, a couple of ideas here that were not in our original negotiating position, but I think are very well stated, are the idea of having conservation pools in Meade and Powell. That's and the way they talk about that, again, it's very persuasive. And the idea that storage recovery and Meade and Powell has to be built in to mandatory reductions. And, so if you think about it, both of those things, I think, are really well stated in their paper, and they absolutely are correct. There's just no two ways about it. They're absolutely correct. Okay. Let's go to,
You've got Doug
just a
Munger.
reminder, go ahead.
You've got Doug Munger up here. Raising his hand.
Oh, Doug, go ahead.
So just quickly to throw gas on the fire here. Yeah, I read that thing and I thought Becky's response to that was very appropriate myself on behalf of the Colorado negotiating. I thought her response to that was fine. I thought this was terribly political grandstanding because Ann Castle just got kicked off of the negotiating committee in the first point. So, the number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I think we could probably live through, or the 1 through 7 on your previous screen. But so the first point is the one, and I think Tim just talked about it too. And Jeff, you hit it totally on the head. And I think that's where we need to be coming from. I mean, you voiced it really well. So that's our interest. So anyhow, my comments. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so here, just as a reminder, we've talked about it before, but maybe you're not spending all day, every day thinking about the negotiation. These are the priorities outlined by Commissioner Mitchell. So the first is we have to acknowledge climate variability. That makes sense. She makes a big point about the fact that water users in the lower division are not more important than water users in the upper division. Even though the way they talk and the way the public opinion war is going would not have you believe that. She says it's very important that we prevent overuse in the lower basin and that we defend against curtailment in the upper basin. Now, Tim, has that shifted in the negotiations You know, I don't know how you even asked that question exactly, but
Yeah.
maybe when Amy's with us this evening, we can say, you know, do you feel like either because of the lower basin's story or public opinion, or to reach a deal, we're going to have to give on number 4. Maybe she'll feel like sharing a little bit about that. I think the most we're gonna get is a hint.
I would hope she wouldn't share, because that would be a lot to give away.
I think the most you're gonna get is a hint.
I don't think we're gonna get.
Okay, number 5, operate Powell and Mead based on actual hydrology and to protect storage.
But isn't that a foundational principle in all of the alternatives? that are
Yeah,
in the NEPA?
well,
Actual hydrology, period.
So that's,
okay, it's a foundational principle.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that.
I
was-
expressed in that paper, Ken, and it's a foundational principle that we have had all along.
Exactly.
If you listen to and participate in, not participate, but observe or listen to behavior in some of those water entities below the ferry, they don't have very much to do with actual hydrology.
Yeah, they don't understand.
They have to do with how much water can be taken from Lake Powell and how much water can be taken from Lake Mead. So I think, in my opinion, the shift has been towards actual hydrology, but it's not necessarily the case that everyone is willing to look at it that way.
Well, there's no way you can leave a term like that in there, that vague. There has to be an agreed upon methodology between the upper and lower basins on exactly what does actual hydrology mean? What are the dates that you're using? How are you quantifying that? You both agree. You know, you got 90% of that you get to use that isn't gone with evaporation and transit losses. But if you want 10%, you're gonna pull back and hold in storage to begin to rebuild the capacity of Powell and Mead. I mean, but there has to be some formula, some agreed upon methodology.
I agree, and rather than how much we have, I think it has to be based on
How much did we get?
how much hydrology we anticipate and are going to get. But not everyone agrees with that, so go ahead, Rebecca.
well, I was just gonna say, I think, so this is all part of that negotiation for the next guidelines, but I think one of the issues with how they've been operating in the past 20 years is they have been looking at forecasts to make decisions instead of looking at the existing water level necessarily in the reservoir, right? That's part of the equation, but they're relying too much on forecasts, and that's one thing that that both states that we've heard have agreed upon is that they need to do more on real-time hydrology and not so much of like, well, what's the 24-month study, since those have been so inaccurate. I think that's, to your point, Ken, that's kind of one area where we've heard potentially some forward progress.
I hope so too. Okay, preserving tribal rights is Becky's baseline. Complying with federal environmental law and advancing coordination with Mexico. Those are pretty much, I think, sort of givens. So really, it's only number 3 and number 4 of our priorities. And number 1 of their in the Venn diagram of overlap, right? Those are the big outliers. Go ahead, Chuck.
I think number 2, and where.
Yeah, okay, you're probably right. You're probably right. I never misspoke.
What she said is the upper, we're under on the upper. They're lower, or they're using over on the lower. But they divide it. You know, that, and one thing that doesn't show up there is conservation. And Becky and everybody everybody is saying, hey, there's conservation. We need conservation in both basins. Maybe that's so we can build up the conservation pools, and both basins can use it, okay? But why should Colorado worry about conservation when we've been on? When we've been on, you know, and I don't see that she's addressed conservation up there. And if we get into the conservation war with them down there, we're the ones gonna, they're not gonna conserve down there. What do they got to conserve? Less housing? You know, well, here they want us to do less irrigation. Now the Imperial Valley, yeah.
Right. All right, if anybody needs, go ahead, Steve.
Going back to number 5, and you know, Rebecca's comment, but I mean, to me, the driving force is they're writing those. They're writing next year's contracts in September and October. So they're forcing themselves to use forecasts amounts. So nobody's waiting for actual hydrology to write the contracts, and I don't know why, I don't know the necessity. What's driving writing those contracts in September and October versus waiting and doing them in like January and February? It's maybe it's the acres of crops that people in the lower basin are planting based on whatever water they think is gonna be available. I don't know, but it seems to me like if you really wanna try to use actual hydrology, the whole sequence is off about 4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or, and I've heard it suggested that maybe it can't just be one contract. But maybe it's gotta be incremental
Orders or something.
quarterly adjustments or something,
Or at least
you know.
one in October and one in the spring when we know
More
what
like,
actual hydrology
yeah.
looks like.
and
After May.
I don't know if. I don't know if there are water entities in the lower basin that probably would argue with that. But I think it's a much more realistic approach, just as you talked about. And so their farming season is shifted way in advance of ours. So, you know, they're.
Well, I'm sure the push came from them to have the system that we have now. The system we have now doesn't make sense for the water crisis.
Right. Exactly, so, all right, just as a reminder, Sal, can you go forward one slide? In case anybody needs it, these are the two kind of going in positions, does everybody remember? So basically by the way, that's the lower division states. It's not the Latter-day Saints. Mormons didn't have anything to do with it, all right? But the lower division states proposal is based on system contents, right? All the reservoirs, not just Powell and Meade. And then they propose reductions when it gets below 38% total system context. They take the first 1.5 million, and then below 38%, the cuts above 1.5 million evenly split. And by the way, from Rebecca's presentation, I'm pretty sure when you add in those percentages of the other entities, we would still be below 38% of the system. It'd be dang close. So we would probably be in this tier this year if that proposal were accepted.
Yes.
Right, and you remember we had Powell releases based on percentages. And they called for total reductions of up to 3.9 million acre feet. And so there's a lot more to it than that, but basically the differences between these are this proposal called for evenly split cuts between us and them below after the first 1.5 million acre feet reduction. Okay, so that's that. I think we're pretty close to our time limit here. We are. the guideline, the deadline for the new guidelines is still August. The EIS alternatives are still, as far as we know, targeted for release this summer. You remember the 4, and they were waiting for adjustments to those 4 alternatives and to the 2 basins proposals. So the situation, I think, remains fluid. Steve?
Jeff, what do you see that? I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was an article that the lower basin states approached the Trump administration, asking them to weigh in, to become involved in this process. Almost to be honest, the way I read the article, it was like they would just take it over.
Yeah,
And we know Trump likes to write executive orders. And we know that 2 swing states, Nevada and Arizona, are lower basin states. Is anybody talking about it? The White House weighing in?
there was an article that I intended to send you a link to that I did not, in the Los Angeles Times, in which the National Resources Defense Council has asked the White House to weigh in. And what they are asking the White House, what they're asking the administration to do is clamp down on the beneficial use provision. And mainly what that would affect is ag in the lower basin. And the target of that, I'll make sure I email you everybody on the Big River list. I'll email you a link to that LA Times article, but it's the gist of it is, by exporting a lot of alfalfa, they're using almost year-round water to raise alfalfa, and a lot of that alfalfa is now being exported. It's basically the same as exporting water.
Yeah.
So that's the argument of the environmental groups. I have not heard anything. I heard some informal things from some of my friends at DNR that said they didn't feel that California's relationship with the administration would benefit the lower basin very much.
No, not today.
So but other than that one comment, that's what I know. I don't know much more than that.
I just count voters. Yeah, if you look at those 3 states, there's a lot of voters compared to the upper basin states.
Yeah, they have a lot of money and a lot of votes. Yep. That's for sure. Okay. Thank you for your thoughts. I appreciate your participation. Actually, Ken was gonna give us a little bit of an IBCC work recap. We don't have much time, but yeah. Sorry, I lost track of that. I'm sorry.
Just that, the staff has continued to be really receptive to our ideas, with Lauren Riss running the CWCD, and Kat is the planning section chief, along with Becky as the chair, have been pretty much just telling us, what does he want to do? And we'll help do it. And so that's a dangerous thing with this group, because there's some people in there with some pretty big plans, and I think Jeff and I are 2 of those people. So one thing that we've done is, one of the things that's so annoying is that they say, okay, well, we'll meet for historically 2 hours and 3 times a year. And we all know that that's a joke. That, what you can get done, and half the people spend way more time just driving one way to get to the meeting than for a 2-hour lecture. So they immediately started to change the content. We had full day meetings. Now we have a C9. And what's latest thing was that in the February meeting, we had agreed to do a comparison with the no and low regrets strategic framework that was developed with Becky, back in 2013 to what we just currently put together from all of our surveys and, breakout groups and everything at C9 is these 9 key topics that we want to stay focused on as part of a drought response in the state. So myself and a couple other people said, well, we need a subcommittee. There's a lot of work to do here, and we're not asking you as staff to do this comparison, we can help. And so that's what we did, we divided up the points, we have, I think, 6 or 7 people on our subcommittee. We, my comparison was on collaboration and education. So I had to find out how many of that topic from C9, where is that referenced in that 80-page document? Well, that took me an hour. It was like, because there's 4 different points under that. So, but we've been meeting every month and updating, everything's into a spreadsheet now. We're planning the agenda for the C9 already. It's gonna contain a lot more interaction between the actual members themselves so that they can get to know each other better and learn from each other. Like everybody here, I think, has been to the Colorado Water Congress meetings. And you know that what the best part of the meeting is out in the hallway where you're getting a chance to finally catch up and talk to somebody that you've been needing to talk to. So that's, I think, just good news that we're already setting the foundation of the next water plan and the implementation of the. So that's probably as brief as I can get.
What's the date of the IBCC in June?
The ICC in June is like the 26th or something like that.
Okay, that's a Thursday. Or would it be something, so that last week? We don't need to take group time, can you?
Yeah, it's right there at the end of June.
Okay.
That's just, it's hours.
25th,
Okay. Perfect.
and I think they're doing it in Grand Junction.
Okay, perfect. So perfect, good deal.
Yeah, that's
All right, so with that, I think we'll let the Pebble people have the con. And thanks again for your participation, Rebecca, as always, thanks for your update, that's really helpful. Really helpful, we'll think about which one of those slides you want to use this evening.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
It'd be nice on that slide that has each of that. Looking bases where they're at, you know. Like we're 70.
Second.
Where's Colorado, we know that whole